Sarah didn't need to check her voicemail. She had heard every accusation. Still, her phone buzzed with one voicemail waiting, but she read the transcript anyway.
Miss Chen, this is Minjun Park, Executive Vice President of International Expansion at Hansong Global. I'm extremely disappointed by your no-show this morning. We rearranged our entire schedule to accommodate you, and you couldn't extend us the basic courtesy of attendance, or even a phone call. I've worked with consultants across the continents, and I've never experienced such blatant disrespect. Consider our contract offer withdrawn.
The tone was cold, clipped in a passive-aggressive way. Sarah closed her phone and quietly walked out of the Hanseong office building. Today we are opening up the diary of Sarah Chen and her story. The Consultant's Gambit, a business lesson in disguise. Part 1. The Boardroom Mistake. Sarah Chen had built her reputation on preparation. In the 12 years since founding Meridian Investment Consultancy, she'd learned that the difference between a good pitch and a great one often lay in the details no one else bothered to notice, the way a CFO's jaw tightened when discussing liquidity, the glance exchanged between board members when risk was mentioned, the telltale shuffle of papers that meant someone was about to object. Today, she was hunting for those details at Hanseong Global's North American headquarters. The building rose 43 stories above downtown Seattle, all steel and glass, reflecting the gray October sky. Sarah checked her watch. 8:30 a.m. Her meeting wasn't until 9:30, but she hadn't arrived early by accident. The Hanseong account could change everything for Meridian. The South Korean conglomerate was expanding aggressively into European and American markets, and they needed a consultancy that understood both Western investment strategies and Asian business culture. Sarah's firm was perfectly positioned if she could land the contract. Normally, she'd send her senior partners to handle initial meetings while she worked behind the scenes, gathering intelligence, crafting strategy. But Hanseong was different. This wasn't just about one project. It was about establishing a relationship that could open doors across 3 continents. For this, she needed to be in the room. She pushed through the revolving doors into a lobby that smelled of expensive coffee and ambition. The morning rush was in full swing, employees streaming toward the elevator banks, security guards checking IDs, a barista calling out complicated drink orders. Sarah had dressed carefully, a charcoal gray suit, tailored but not flashy, with a cream silk blouse. Professional enough to blend in, expensive enough to signal competence. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low bun, and she wore minimal jewelry, just her watch and small diamond studs. She bought a coffee she didn't want and found a seat near the elevator banks with a clear view of the lobby. Then she watched. The junior employees arrived first, moving quickly, eyes down, clutching their phones and coffee cups. They badged in without speaking to security, muscle memory guiding them. Then came the mid-level managers, moving more slowly, stopping to chat with colleagues, their body language more relaxed. Finally, around 8:50, the senior executives began to arrive. Sarah could spot them immediately, the way security guards straightened when they approached, the difference in the greetings they received, the subtle confidence in their stride. She made mental notes. The company culture seemed hierarchical but not oppressive. People smiled, joked. There was energy here, ambition. Good signs. At 9:15, Sarah made her way to the 37th floor, where Hanseong's executive offices were located. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect posture and a practiced smile, directed her to conference room C. "You're early," the receptionist noted, not unkindly. "I prefer to be prepared," Sarah replied. The conference room was empty, a long table surrounded by leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Elliott Bay. Sarah didn't take a seat at the table. Instead, she positioned herself near the windows, far enough from the door to observe without being immediately noticed. She pulled out her phone, pretending to check emails, and waited. The first to arrive was a middle-aged white man in a navy suit, carrying a leather portfolio. He glanced at Sarah, nodded politely, and took a seat in the middle of the table. 2 minutes later, A younger Asian woman entered, her arms full of folders. She smiled at Sarah, a quick, professional smile, and sat near the head of the table. Then came 3 more executives in quick succession, 2 men and a woman, all in their 40s or 50s, all moving with the careful confidence of people who'd spent decades in corporate environments. They greeted each other warmly, took their seats, and began making small talk about a Seahawks game. Sarah continued to observe, noting the seating arrangements, the dynamics. The younger woman was clearly junior to the others, but was seated prominently, a rising star, perhaps. The man who'd arrived first kept checking his watch. Nervous? Or just punctual? At exactly 9:30, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Sarah felt it before she saw it, the way conversations stopped mid-sentence, the way everyone's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. She looked toward the door. The man who entered was tall, probably 6 feet, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He was Korean, she guessed in his late 30s, with sharp features and dark eyes that swept the room with quick efficiency. His suit was impeccable, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with a burgundy tie that suggested both confidence and careful attention to detail. His hair was styled back from his face, and he moved with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own authority. This, Sarah realized, was the person she needed to impress. He stopped just inside the doorway, his gaze moving across the room, taking inventory. His eyes passed over Sarah without pausing. She was standing by the windows, phone in hand, clearly not seated at the table. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture dismissed her as irrelevant. Then he snapped his fingers. The sound was sharp, imperious. He was looking directly at Sarah now, his expression one of mild irritation. "You," he said, his English accented but fluent. "Why isn't there water? Coffee? Tea?" He gestured at the empty table. "And the projector isn't set up. We're supposed to start now." Sarah felt the moment crystallize around her. She could correct him immediately, introduce herself, watch him scramble to apologize. It would be satisfying, certainly. It would also tell her nothing about who this man really was. Instead, she slipped her phone into her pocket and met his gaze with calm, quiet confidence. "I'll take care of it right away," she said, her voice neutral, professional. She walked past him, close enough to catch the scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated, and out into the hallway. Behind her, she heard him take his seat at the head of the table, heard the murmur of greetings from the other executives. Sarah found the receptionist and requested water, coffee, and tea service for 6. Then she located an AV technician and asked him to set up the projector in conference room C. The young man looked confused. "I thought that meeting was with an outside consultant," he said. "Usually, they bring their own presentation." "Just set it up, please," Sarah said pleasantly. She waited in the hallway while the technician worked, while the catering staff delivered beverages. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see the executives settling in, reviewing documents. The Korean executive, she still didn't know his name, sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but alert, like a predator at rest. When everything was ready, Sarah returned to the doorway. The Korean executive glanced up, saw her, and made a dismissive gesture. "You can wait outside," he said. "We'll call if we need anything else." Sarah nodded and stepped back into the hallway. She found a seat near the elevators, far enough away to be unobtrusive, but close enough to hear if anyone raised their voice. And then she waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Through the glass walls, she could see the executives checking their watches, exchanging glances. The Korean executive pulled out his phone, frowned at it, set it down. More time passed. At the 15-minute mark, he stood up and walked to the door, looking up and down the hallway as if expecting someone to materialize. His jaw was tight, his movements sharp with irritation. 20 minutes. Sarah watched as he began to pace, his phone pressed to his ear. She was too far away to hear what he was saying, but his body language spoke volumes. Frustration, anger, disbelief. At the 30-minute mark, he exploded. Sarah heard him clearly now, his voice carrying through the glass and down the hallway. "This is completely unacceptable," He was saying in English, presumably for the benefit of the non-Korean speakers in the room. We cleared our schedules for this meeting. The entire executive team is here. And this consultant, he spat the word like a curse, can't be bothered to show up on time. This is exactly the kind of unprofessional bullshit that makes me question whether we should be working with Western firms at all. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but she was filing away every word, every gesture, every revelation about how this man operated under stress. I'm calling her right now, he continued, pulling out his phone again. And if I don't get a satisfactory explanation, we're moving on to the next firm on our list. I don't care what the board recommended. He stormed out of the conference room, moving past Sarah without seeing her, and disappeared around a corner. Sarah heard his voice, distant now, leaving what was clearly a voicemail message. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Cold, clipped, furious. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a new voicemail notification. She stood, smoothed her suit jacket, and walked calmly to the elevator. She rode down to the lobby, walked out into the gray Seattle morning, and allowed herself a small, private smile. She had learned everything she needed to know. Quick question. What would you have done? If you were Sarah, would you play it along or immediately put him in his place? Drop a comment below. Now back to the story. Part 2, the confrontation. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of her bedroom mirror, fastening a diamond necklace her mother had given her when Meridian landed its first major client. The necklace had become something of a talisman. She wore it to important events, moments when she needed to remember how far she'd come. Tonight was the Pacific Northwest Business Excellence Gala, an annual event that brought together the region's most influential executives, investors, and entrepreneurs. Meridian had been selected as one of 3 firms to be spotlighted for innovation in financial consulting, and Sarah was scheduled to give a brief speech introducing her company. She'd chosen a floor-length gown in deep emerald green, elegant, and sophisticated without being ostentatious. Her hair was down tonight, falling in soft waves past her shoulders, and she'd allowed herself more dramatic makeup than usual, smoky eyes, bold lips. This was a night for being seen, for making an impression. Her phone buzzed. A text from her COO, Randall, cars downstairs. Ready to knock them dead? Sarah smiled and grabbed her clutch. Always, she texted back. The gala was being held at the Four Seasons, in a ballroom that had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, crystal chandeliers, white roses, tables draped in champagne-colored silk. Sarah arrived to find the room already crowded with Seattle's business elite, everyone dressed in their finest, champagne flutes in hand, voices rising in a pleasant hum of conversation and laughter. Randall found her immediately, resplendent in a tuxedo, his dark skin glowing in the warm light. "You look incredible," he said, kissing her cheek. "Ready for your moment?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied. They mingled for the first hour, working the room with practiced ease. Sarah had always been good at this, the small talk, the networking, the delicate dance of business relationships. She spoke with a venture capitalist interested in emerging markets, a tech CEO looking for investment advice, a journalist writing a profile on women in finance. And then she saw him. He was standing near the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand, deep in conversation with 2 other men. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like it had been made for his body specifically, which it probably had, and even from across the room, Sarah could feel the force of his presence. He laughed at something one of his companions said, and the sound carried across the ballroom, rich and genuine. "That's him, isn't it?" Randall said quietly. He'd been with Sarah long enough to read her expressions. "The Hanseong executive." Minjun Park, Sarah confirmed. She'd done her research in the weeks since the disastrous meeting. Park Minjun, Executive Vice President of International Expansion, Hanseong Global. 38 years old, MBA from Wharton, reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and occasionally ruthless. He'd been with Hanseong for 15 years, rising through the ranks with impressive speed. He was also, according to several articles she'd read, being groomed for a C-suite position. Are you going to talk to him? Randall asked. Not yet, Sarah said. Let's see how the evening unfolds. At 8 o'clock, the formal program began. The MC, a local news anchor with perfect hair and a practiced smile, welcomed everyone and began introducing the evening's honorees. Sarah was third, after a biotech startup and a sustainable architecture firm. When her name was called, Sarah made her way to the stage, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The spotlight was warm on her face as she took her position behind the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. And there, in the third row, she found Minjun Park's eyes. He was watching her with polite attention, the same expression he probably wore at dozens of these events. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. Sarah smiled and began to speak. Good evening. My name is Sarah Chin, and I'm the founder and CEO of Meridian Investment Consultancy. 12 years ago, I started Meridian with a simple philosophy that the best investment advice comes from truly understanding your clients, not just their portfolios, but their culture, their values, their goals. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the audience before returning to Minjun. In our industry, there's a tendency to make assumptions, to see what we expect to see, rather than what's actually in front of us, to mistake appearance for substance or silence for absence. Minjun's expression changed. Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes. Attention, perhaps, or the first hint of uncomfortableness at her directness. I've learned that the most valuable insights often come from observation, from being present, even when others don't realize you're there, from listening, especially to the things people say when they think no one important is listening. Now Minjun's posture had changed. He was sitting forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers, and Sarah saw the exact moment when embarrassment hit him. His face went very still, and even from the stage, she could see the color rising in his cheeks. At Meridian, we believe that respect is the foundation of any successful business relationship. Respect for our clients, certainly, but also respect for everyone we encounter, because you never know who might be the key to your next opportunity, or who you might be dismissing without realizing it. She let that hang in the air for a moment, watching Minjun's jaw tighten, watching him process the implications of her words. Then she smiled, warm and professional, and continued with the rest of her speech, talking about Meridian's achievements, their expansion plans, their commitment to excellence. But the message had been delivered. Minjun Park knew exactly who she was and exactly what he'd done. When she finished and returned to her seat, Randall leaned over and whispered, "That was masterful." "Did you see his face?" "I saw," Sarah murmured. She didn't look in Minjun's direction for the rest of the program, but she could feel his gaze on her, heavy and intense. When the formal speeches ended and the crowd dispersed for more mingling and dancing, Sarah excused herself to the ladies' room, needing a moment to collect herself. She was touching up her lipstick when the door opened and a woman entered, the same young executive who'd been in the conference room that day, the rising star. Up close, she was even younger than Sarah had thought, probably not yet 30, with delicate features and intelligent eyes. "Miss Chin," the woman said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm Jennifer Kim. I work with Minjun Park at Hanseong." Sarah turned to face her fully. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Kim." "I wanted to apologize," Jennifer said, her words coming in a rush, "for what happened at that meeting. I realized who you were about 10 minutes after you left, but by then," she shook her head. "I should have said something immediately. I should have corrected the situation. I'm sorry." Sarah studied her for a moment, seeing genuine distress in the younger woman's face. "You're not responsible for your colleagues' assumptions, Ms. Kim." "No, but I could have prevented the whole situation from escalating. I knew you were the consultant we were meeting with. I'd seen your photo on Meridian's website, but I was so focused on my own nervousness about the meeting that I didn't speak up when I should have." Jennifer met Sarah's eyes. "That was a failure of courage on my part, and I apologize." Sarah felt her opinion of Jennifer Kim rise several notches. It took strength to admit a mistake, especially to someone you'd wronged. "I appreciate your apology," Sarah said, "and I respect your honesty." Jennifer nodded, looking relieved. For what it's worth, Minjun has been beating himself up about it for 3 weeks. He's not usually, she paused, choosing her words carefully. He's demanding, yes. He has high standards. But he's not usually cruel or dismissive. That day, he was under enormous pressure. The board had questioned his judgment on the consultant selection, and he was determined to prove them wrong. When you didn't appear, or when he thought you didn't appear, it felt like a validation of their doubts. That doesn't excuse his behavior, Sarah said quietly. No, Jennifer agreed. It doesn't. But it might explain it. She hesitated, then added, he's outside right now, by the way. On the terrace. I think he's trying to work up the courage to apologize to you himself. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Is that so? He's been standing out there for 20 minutes, rehearsing what to say. Jennifer smiled slightly. I've never seen him nervous before. It's oddly humanizing. After Jennifer left, Sarah took her time, reapplying her lipstick, checking her hair, letting Minjun wait a little longer. Then she made her way through the ballroom to the terrace doors. The October night was cool, the air crisp with the promise of rain. The terrace overlooked the city, lights twinkling in the darkness like earthbound stars. And there, leaning against the railing, was Minjun Park. He turned when he heard the door open, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Up close, Sarah could see the fine lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the railing as if anchoring himself. Miss Chin, he said finally, his voice low, I owe you an apology. Sarah moved to stand a few feet away from him, close enough to talk comfortably, but maintaining a professional distance. Yes, she said simply. You do. He flinched slightly at her directness, but he didn't look away. What I did that day was inexcusable. I made assumptions based on. He stopped, shook his head. There's no good way to finish that sentence. I saw a woman standing in a conference room, and I assumed she was support staff. I didn't ask. I didn't verify. I just assumed, and then I treated you with disrespect. You did, Sarah agreed. I've spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to apologize to you, Minjun continued. I called your office the day after the gala was announced, when I saw Meridian on the list of honorees. I wanted to reach out before tonight to apologize privately, but every time I tried to write an email or prepare what to say, it felt inadequate. So you decided to wait until I publicly called you out? Sarah asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Minjun's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile. Your speech was pointed. It was meant to be. I deserved it. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Miss Chin, I'm truly sorry. What I did was wrong on multiple levels, professionally, personally, ethically. I let pressure and stress turn me into someone I don't want to be. Someone who judges people based on where they're standing rather than who they are. Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying him. His apologies seemed genuine, and she appreciated that he wasn't making excuses or trying to minimize what he'd done. But she also wasn't ready to let him off the hook entirely. Do you know what bothered me most about that day? She asked. Minjun shook his head. It wasn't that you mistook me for an assistant. Honest mistakes happen. It was the way you treated someone you thought was an assistant. The finger snapping. The dismissive tone. The assumption that this person's time and dignity were less valuable than yours. Minjun's jaw tightened, and Sarah saw shame flash across his face. You're right. That's the worst part of it. I treated someone. I treated you as if you were beneath my notice. As if your only value was in serving me. He looked out at the city lights. My mother was a secretary for 20 years. She worked for executives who treated her exactly the way I treated you that day. I watched her come home exhausted, frustrated, feeling invisible. And I swore I would never be that kind of person. But you were, Sarah said softly. But I was, he agreed. And I'm sorry. Not just because you turned out to be the consultant I was supposed to meet, but because no one deserves to be treated that way. I'm sorry, Miss Chen. Truly. Sarah let the silence stretch between them, watching the way the light from the ballroom cast shadows across his face. She believed him. She could hear the genuine remorse in his voice, see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. I accept your apology, she said finally. Minjun looked up, surprise and relief evident in his expression. Thank you. But I want you to understand something, Sarah continued. I didn't play along that day just to teach you a lesson. I did it because I needed to see who you really were under pressure. How you treated people you perceived as having less power than you. What you said when you thought no one important was listening. And what did you learn? Minjun asked. Sarah considered the question. I learned that you have high standards, which I respect. I learned that you're passionate about your work and protective of your company's interests. I also learned that you have blind spots and that when you're stressed, you can be cruel without meaning to be. That's a fair assessment, Minjun said quietly. The question is, Sarah continued, what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to dismiss it as a one-time mistake, or are you going to use it to become better? Minjun was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. My father built Hanseong from nothing. He started with a small trading company in Busan and turned it into a global conglomerate. He taught me that success requires discipline, focus, and the willingness to make hard decisions. But he also taught me that how you treat people matters. That respect and dignity aren't luxuries, they're necessities. He turned to look at Sarah directly. I forgot that lesson. Or maybe I just got so caught up in the pressure of proving myself that I stopped paying attention to how I was treating people along the way. Either way, you're right. This can't be a one-time mistake. It has to be a wake-up call. Sarah felt something shift in her perception of him. This wasn't just a polished apology from a man trying to salvage a business relationship. This was genuine self-reflection, genuine commitment to change. I appreciate that, she said. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the gala drifting out from the ballroom, music, laughter, the clink of glasses. Can I ask you something? Minjun said. Of course. Why did you wait so long to reveal who you were? You could have corrected me immediately, or even after a few minutes. Why wait the full 30 minutes? Sarah smiled. Because I wanted to see what you'd do. How long you'd wait before giving up. What you'd say when you thought I wasn't coming. Whether you'd blame yourself or blame me. And what did my behavior tell you? That you're impatient. That you have a temper. That you're quick to judge and slow to question your own assumptions. Sarah paused. But also that you care deeply about your work. That you hold yourself and others to high standards. That you're willing to fight for what you believe in. Minjun absorbed this, nodding slowly. I'm not sure whether to be flattered or insulted. Both, probably, Sarah said with a slight smile. He laughed, a real laugh this time, warm and unguarded. You're very direct, Miss Chen. I find it saves time, Sarah replied. And please call me Sarah. Only if you call me Minjun. All right, Minjun. He smiled, and Sarah noticed for the first time how it transformed his face, softening the sharp angles, bringing warmth to his eyes. So, he said, I assume Hanseong has lost any chance of working with Meridian? Sarah tilted her head, considering. That depends. On what? On whether you're willing to start over. To approach this as equals, with mutual respect. To recognize that my firm has something valuable to offer, and that I'm not interested in working with clients who see me as less than a partner. Minjun nodded slowly. I can do that. I want to do that. He hesitated, then added, the truth is, Sarah, even before that disastrous meeting, I'd done extensive research on Meridian. Your firm's track record is exceptional. Your understanding of cross-cultural business dynamics is exactly what Hanseong needs as we expand into new markets. I wanted to work with you then, and I still want to work with you now if you're willing to give us another chance. Us? Sarah asked. Or you? Both, Minjun admitted. Hanseong needs Meridian's expertise. But I also, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I'd like the opportunity to show you that I'm not the person you met in that conference room. Or rather, that I'm not only that person. That I can be better. Sarah studied him, weighing her options. The smart business decision would be to walk away, to avoid the complication of working with someone who'd already proven he could be difficult. But she'd built Meridian by taking calculated risks, by seeing potential where others saw problems. All right, she said finally. Let's start over, but on my terms. Name them, Minjun said immediately. First, we meet as equals. No power games, no assumptions. You treat everyone on my team with respect, regardless of their position. Agreed. Second, I want full transparency. If there are concerns or conflicts, we address them directly and immediately. No passive-aggressive voicemails. Minjun winced. You listened to it? I didn't need to. I heard enough through the conference room walls. Sarah's expression softened slightly. But yes, agreed. Direct communication only. Third, Sarah continued, I want to meet with your full executive team, including the people who were in that conference room. I want to understand Hanseon's culture, your goals, your challenges. And I want honest answers, not the polished version you'd give to impress a consultant. That's fair, Minjun said. Anything else? Sarah smiled. Let's start with those three and see how it goes. Minjun extended his hand. Deal. Sarah shook it, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. Deal. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, and Sarah felt something unexpected, a spark of connection, of possibility. She released his hand and stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how intimate the terrace had become. I should get back inside, she said. People will wonder where I've gone. Of course, Minjun said. But Sarah, thank you for giving me another chance. I won't waste it. See that you don't, Sarah replied, but her tone was warm. As she turned to go, Minjun spoke again. Sarah? She looked back. That dress, he said, his voice softer now. It's the exact color of the ocean near Jeju Island at sunset. It's beautiful. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, surprised by the compliment, by the sudden shift from professional to personal. Thank you, she said quietly. Then she walked back into the ballroom, very aware of his gaze following her and wondering what exactly she'd just agreed to. What do you think about second chances? Comment second chances. If you agree with Sarah giving Minjun a second chance after the way he treated her. Let's see how it goes. Part 3. The Partnership. The next morning, Sarah arrived at her office to find a delivery waiting at her desk, a stunning arrangement of white orchids in a sleek black vase, accompanied by a handwritten note on heavy cream cardstock. Sarah, it read in elegant script, thank you for your grace last night and for the opportunity to prove myself. I look forward to our partnership. Minjun. Randall appeared in her doorway, coffee in hand, eyebrows raised. Those are gorgeous. Secret admirer. Business associate, Sarah said, but she couldn't quite keep the smile off her face. Randall said, clearly not believing her. The same business associate you spent 30 minutes talking to on the terrace last night? We were discussing a potential contract. For 30 minutes? On a romantic terrace? At night? Sarah threw a pen at him. Don't you have work to do? Randall laughed and retreated, but not before saying, for the record, I looked him up. Minjun Park. Very impressive credentials. Also very handsome, if you're into the whole tall, dark, and brooding thing. Randall. I'm just saying, there are worse ways to mix business and pleasure. We're not mixing anything, Sarah said firmly. This is purely professional. But even as she said it, she found herself touching the orchid petals, remembering the way Minjun had looked at her in the moonlight, the warmth in his voice when he'd complimented her dress. Purely professional, she told herself. That's all this is. She almost believed it. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and Minjun met 3 times to discuss the potential partnership between Meridian and Hanseon. The first meeting was formal, held at Meridian's offices with both teams present. Minjun was professional, respectful, and impressively prepared. He asked intelligent questions, listened carefully to Sarah's responses, and treated every member of her team with courtesy. The second meeting was at Hanseon's headquarters, the same building where their first encounter had gone so wrong. This time, Minjun personally greeted Sarah in the lobby and escorted her upstairs. When they passed the conference room where he'd mistaken her for an assistant, he paused. I think about that day every time I walk past this room, he said quietly. Good, Sarah replied. You should. He smiled ruefully. You don't pull your punches, do you? Would you respect me if I did? No, he admitted. I wouldn't. The third meeting was different. It was late on a Friday afternoon, and they'd been working through the details of the contract for hours. Most of both teams had left for the weekend, leaving just Sarah and Minjun in his office, surrounded by documents and empty coffee cups. "I think we're done," Sarah said finally, sitting back in her chair and rubbing her eyes. "We can have the legal teams finalize everything next week." "Agreed," Minjun said. He stood and walked to the window, stretching his shoulders. "Thank you for your patience with this process. I know we've been thorough to the point of tedious." "Thorough is good," Sarah said. "It means we're both taking this seriously." Minjun turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "All right. Why did you start Meridian? What made you want to build your own firm rather than work for an established consultancy?" Sarah considered the question. It was personal, but not inappropriately so. "Control," she said finally. "I wanted to build something that reflected my values, my vision. I'd worked for other firms, and I was good at it. But I was always having to compromise on which clients we took, on how we approached problems, on who we hired. I wanted to make those decisions myself." "That takes courage," Minjun said. "Starting your own company, especially in a field dominated by established players. It takes stubbornness," Sarah corrected with a smile, "and a high tolerance for risk. And now, 12 years later, do you ever regret it?" "Never," Sarah said without hesitation. "There have been hard times, certainly. Times when I wasn't sure we'd make payroll, or when we lost a client I thought we'd land. But I've never regretted the decision to build something of my own." Minjun nodded slowly. "I envy that." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're an executive vice president of a global conglomerate. What could you possibly envy?" "The freedom," Minjun said. "The ability to make decisions based on what you believe is right, rather than what the board expects or what tradition demands." He returned to his chair, his expression distant. "I love Hanseon. It's been my life for 15 years. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to build something from scratch, to make it entirely my own." "Why don't you?" Sarah asked. "Family obligation," Minjun said simply. "My father built this company. My older brother was supposed to take over, but he died in a car accident 10 years ago. Now I'm the heir apparent, whether I want to be or not." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "About your brother." "Thank you." Minjun was quiet for a moment, then seemed to shake off the melancholy. "But enough about that. It's Friday evening. We've just finalized a major contract, and I'm starving. Have dinner with me." Sarah's first instinct was to decline. They'd just established a professional relationship. Adding a personal dimension seemed unwise. But something in Minjun's expression, a hopefulness, a vulnerability, made her hesitate. "As colleagues," she asked carefully. "As colleagues," Minjun agreed. "Two people who've been working hard and deserve a good meal." "All right," Sarah said, "but somewhere casual. I'm too tired for anything fancy." Minjun smiled. "I know just the place." 20 minutes later, they were seated in a small Korean restaurant in the International District, the kind of place with plastic chairs and handwritten menus, where the food was authentic and the portions were generous. Minjun ordered for both of them in rapid Korean, and soon their table was covered with banchan, small dishes of kimchi, pickled vegetables, and seasoned sprouts. "This is one of my favorite places in Seattle," Minjun said, pouring them both tea. "It reminds me of the restaurants my grandmother used to take me to in Seoul." "You grew up in Korea?" Sarah asked. "Until I was 12. Then my father moved the family to the States to oversee Hanseon's North American expansion. I went to school here, went to college here. But Korea is still home in a lot of ways." "I understand that," Sarah said. "My parents met in Taiwan. My father is Black and my mother is Taiwanese. They met in Taiwan, had me, and then they moved to California when I was 5. I spoke English with my father and Mandarin with my mother at home, ate Taiwanese food, celebrated Taiwanese holidays. I've always felt caught between two worlds. The perpetual immigrant experience," Minjun said with a wry smile. "Too American for Korea, too Korean for America." "Exactly." Their main dishes arrived, galbi for Minjun, bibimbap for Sarah, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The food was excellent, rich and flavorful, and Sarah realized she hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. "Can I ask you something?" Minjun said after a while. "You seem to be making a habit of that," Sarah said, but her tone was teasing. "Why did you really give me another chance? After what I did, you would have been justified in walking away. So why didn't you?" Sarah set down her chopsticks, considering her answer. "Honestly, because I saw something in you that night on the terrace. A willingness to be vulnerable, to admit fault, to commit to being better. That's rare, especially in men at your level." "Men at my level," Minjun repeated. "You mean arrogant executives?" "I mean powerful men who are used to being right, who are rarely challenged, who have entire teams of people telling them how brilliant they are." Sarah met his gaze. "It would have been easy for you to make excuses, to minimize what you did, to blame it on stress or cultural differences or a simple misunderstanding. But you didn't. You owned it completely. That told me something important about your character." Minjun was quiet, absorbing her words. "I'm not sure I deserve that much credit. I was just trying to do the right thing." "That's exactly my point," Sarah said. "You were trying to do the right thing, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it meant admitting you'd been wrong. That matters." "You have a way of making me feel both better and worse about myself," Minjun said with a slight smile. "Good," Sarah replied. "That means you're paying attention." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily from business to personal and back again. Sarah learned that Minjun played piano, that he ran marathons to clear his head, that he had a weakness for bad action movies. Minjun learned that Sarah had a black belt in Taekwondo, that she collected first edition books, that she'd once backpacked alone through Southeast Asia for 3 months. By the time they left the restaurant, the sky was dark and the streets were quiet. Minjun walked Sarah to her car, his hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold air. "Thank you for dinner," Sarah said, "and for the conversation. I enjoyed it." "So did I," Minjun said. He hesitated, then added, "Sarah, I know we agreed this was professional. Colleagues celebrating a new partnership. But I have to be honest, I'd like to do this again. Not as colleagues. As two people who enjoy each other's company." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She'd been trying not to acknowledge the attraction she felt, the way her pulse quickened when Minjun smiled, the way she found herself looking forward to their meetings. But hearing him voice it made it real, made it something she had to confront. "Minjun," she said carefully, "we're about to start working together. A personal relationship could complicate things." "It could," he agreed. "Or it could make things better. More honest, more connected." He took a step closer, close enough that Sarah could see the twinkle of hope in his dark eyes. "I'm not asking for a commitment. I'm just asking for a chance to see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility." Sarah knew she should say no. She'd built her career on being smart, being careful, not mixing business with pleasure. But standing there in the cold Seattle night, looking into Minjun's eyes, she found herself wanting to take the risk. "One date," she said finally. "A real date, not a business dinner. And then we see how we feel." Minjun's smile was brilliant. "One date. I can work with that." But Sarah added firmly, "We keep it separate from work. At the office, we're professionals. Whatever happens personally doesn't affect our business relationship." "Agreed," Minjun said. "Though I have to warn you, I'm very good at compartmentalizing." "So am I," Sarah replied. "It's one of my superpowers." Minjun laughed. "I'm learning that you have many superpowers, Sarah Chen." She smiled and unlocked her car. "You have no idea." As she drove home, Sarah found herself grinning like a teenager, her stomach fluttering with anticipation and nerves. She was taking a risk, she knew. Mixing business and personal was always complicated, always dangerous. But something about Minjun made her want to try anyway. Maybe it was the way he'd owned his mistake so completely. Maybe it was the vulnerability she'd seen in him, the sense that beneath the polished executive exterior was someone real, someone worth knowing. Or maybe it was simply chemistry, that indefinable spark that made her want to lean closer when he spoke, that made her hyper-aware of his presence in a room. Whatever it was, Sarah was willing to explore it. Carefully, cautiously, but genuinely. One date, she told herself. Just one date. But even as she thought it, she suspected it would be more than that. Part 4, the Complication. Their first official date was the following Saturday. Minjun picked Sarah up at 7, dressed in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made him look younger, more relaxed than he did in his usual suits. He'd made reservations at a French restaurant on Capitol Hill, intimate and elegant without being stuffy. Over wine and cocoa vin, they talked about everything except work. Minjun told her about growing up in Seoul, about his grandmother who'd taught him to play piano, about the year he'd spent in Paris during business school. Sarah shared stories about her childhood in California, about her parents' restaurant that had failed during the recession, about the professor who'd encouraged her to start her own firm. "You're different tonight," Minjun observed as they shared a chocolate souffle for dessert. "Different how?" Sarah asked. "More relaxed. Less guarded." He smiled. "I like it." "I'm always guarded at work," Sarah admitted. "It's a defense mechanism. When you're a woman in finance, especially when you're running your own firm, you can't afford to show weakness or uncertainty. You have to be perfect all the time." "That sounds exhausting," Minjun said. "It is," Sarah agreed. "But it's also necessary. The moment I let my guard down, someone will be there to question my competence, my authority, my right to be in the room." Minjun was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I've never had to think about that. Being questioned, yes. Being challenged, certainly. But never having my fundamental right to be in the room questioned because of my gender." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry that you have to deal with that. That any woman has to deal with that." "It's getting better," Sarah said. "Slowly. But we still have a long way to go." After dinner, they walked through the neighborhood, the streets alive with Saturday night energy, couples heading to bars, groups of friends laughing on corners, the distant sound of live music. It had started to rain, a light mist that caught in Sarah's hair and made the streetlights glow. "I should get you home," Minjun said, "before this turns into a downpour." When they arrived at Sarah's apartment building, Minjun walked Sarah to the entrance. But neither of them moved. They stood on the sidewalk, rain falling around them, and Sarah felt the moment stretch and deepen. "I had a good time tonight," she said softly. "So did I." Minjun reached out and gently brushed a raindrop from her cheek, his touch feather-light. "Can I see you again?" "I would love that," Sarah said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Minjun smiled and leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Sarah didn't want to pull away. She tilted her face up and met him halfway, and when their lips touched, she felt the warmth of his embrace around her waist, and it felt so right. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. But it was also electric, sending warmth through Sarah's entire body despite the cold rain. When they pulled apart, Minjun was smiling. "I've been wanting to do that since the night of the gala," he admitted. "Really?" Sarah asked. "Even when I was publicly calling you out?" "Especially then," Minjun said. "You were magnificent. Powerful and graceful and completely in control. It was incredibly attractive." Sarah laughed. "You have interesting taste in women." "I have excellent taste in women," Minjun corrected, "as evidenced by the fact that I'm standing in the rain with you right now, and I couldn't be happier." Sarah pulled him in for another long, devoted kiss. Minjun was surprised by the shift in the atmosphere. Her expression changed into a devilish grin as she nudged him toward the entrance. "Well, I can't let you go home soaking wet, can I?" Minjun winced as if he wasn't sure if that statement would bring him pain or pleasure. He cleared his throat. "Sarah, if I go in, I don't know if I can control myself." "Good," she retorted and pulled him inside. When they reached her apartment door, Minjun stopped one last time. "Sarah, are you sure?" Sarah opened the door and pulled him inside. She whispered, "I want this. I want you tonight." Minjun gave up all resistance and grabbed her like she was water in the hot desert sun. Soon an avalanche of shoes, jackets, shirts went flying everywhere, leading a trail to her bedroom. Between hurried kisses, Minjun was desperately trying to unhook her bra, but his fingers were failing at every attempt. They swirled around in kisses, with hands moving up and down frantically as if they were running out of time. They both stumbled and fell into the bed. Sarah let out a surprised scream wrapped in laughter. Minjun landed on top of her and couldn't help but chuckle too. "We are such a pair right now." He paused and looked into her eyes. "I want to take my time, but right now I can't wait." "It's okay, we have all night," Sarah responded. She sat up, giving full access to her back. He took his time releasing the remaining clasp. He pulled back off the bed as she lifted her body so he could remove her jeans and the remaining garments they were both wearing. He gazed at her with pure admiration. He rejoined her while caressing her skin. "You are so beautiful," he whispered in between, kissing a trail down her neck and collarbone. His kisses felt like shock to her skin. She tried to control her reactions, but it was no use. Sarah groaned out to him, "Minjun." "Yes, now," she demanded. Something shifted in his touch. She felt his eyes pierce her soul as he entered. They both held each other tight as if trying to contain an explosion. But the effort was futile. Minjun's eyes widened with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he spouted breathlessly. "I couldn't hold." Sarah covered his mouth with hers to silence him. "Don't be sorry. We both needed that. Like I said before, we have all night." And that they did. They enjoyed each other 2 more times that night, taking their sweet time, learning each other's bodies and desires with every sound, touch, and every movement. In the aftermath, Minjun rolled over and pulled Sarah into his arms as they held each other and fell asleep entangled together. After that night, they spent every night and every weekend together. They kept it quiet, not hiding exactly, but not advertising either. At work, they were consummate professionals. Sarah and her team began the consulting work for Hanseong, and Minjun was an ideal client, responsive and respectful and genuinely interested in their recommendations. But outside of work, they were something else entirely. They went to concerts and museums, tried new restaurants, spent long evenings talking about everything and nothing. Sarah learned that Minjun was funny, with a dry wit that caught her off guard. Minjun discovered that Sarah was surprisingly adventurous, always up for trying something new. 6 weeks into their relationship, they were at Minjun's apartment having dinner. He cooked for her bulgogi and japchae and homemade kimchi, and they ate on his balcony overlooking the city, wrapped in blankets against the November cold. "I need to tell you something," Minjun said as they finished eating. Sarah's stomach tightened. Those words were never followed by good news. "All right. The board is sending me to Seoul next month. They want me to oversee the expansion into Southeast Asian markets from headquarters. It's a promotion, essentially more responsibility, more visibility. But it means I'll be gone for at least 6 months, possibly longer." Sarah absorbed this, trying to sort through her feelings. They'd only been dating for 6 weeks. It wasn't like they were in a serious, committed relationship. But the thought of Minjun being halfway around the world for 6 months made her chest ache. "That's a great opportunity," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "It is," Minjun agreed. "But it's also terrible timing." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah, I know we haven't been doing this for very long. And I know we agreed to keep things casual, to see where it goes. But I need you to know, this was never casual for me." Sarah's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm falling for you. That these past 6 weeks have been some of the best of my life. That the thought of being away from you for 6 months makes me want to turn down the promotion, which is completely irrational and probably a sign that I'm in deeper than I realized." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Minjun, I'm not asking you to wait for me," he continued. "That wouldn't be fair. But I'm asking if you feel the same way. If this is something worth trying to maintain, even with the distance." Sarah stood and walked to the balcony railing, looking out at the city lights. She'd spent her entire adult life being careful, being smart, protecting herself from risk. But Minjun made her want to be brave. She turned back to face him. "I'm falling for you too," she said quietly. "I didn't want to be. I tried not to be, but I am." Minjun stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "So what do we do?" "We try," Sarah said, wrapping her arms around his waist. "We do long distance for 6 months. We video chat and text and make it work. And when you come back, we figure out what comes next." Is it that simple? Minjun said, his lips against her hair. It won't be simple, Sarah replied. It'll be hard and frustrating, and there will be times when we want to give up. But I think you're worth it. I think we're worth it. Minjun pulled back to look at her, his eyes intense. I love you, Sarah Chen. I know it's too soon to say that, and I know it's probably going to scare you, but I do. I love you. Sarah felt her breath catch. He was right, it was too soon, it was scary. But it was also true. She could feel it in the way her heart raced when she saw him, in the way she found herself thinking about him at random moments, in the way being with him felt like coming home. I love you too, she whispered. Minjun kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Sarah let herself fall into it, into him, into the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of being completely, vulnerably in love. Part 5. The Decision. The 6 months that followed were exactly as hard as Sarah had predicted. The time difference between Seattle and Seoul made communication difficult. When Sarah was starting her workday, Minjun was ending his. They made it work through early morning video calls and late night texts, through care packages and surprise flower deliveries, through sheer determination and stubbornness. There were hard moments. Times when Sarah felt lonely and frustrated, when she questioned whether they were crazy to try to maintain a relationship across 12 time zones. Times when Minjun was exhausted and stressed, when the pressure of his new responsibilities made him short-tempered and distant. But there were also beautiful moments. The time Minjun surprised her by flying back to Seattle for her birthday, staying for just 36 hours before having to return to Seoul. The handwritten letters he sent, old-fashioned and romantic. The way Sarah's heart still skipped a beat every time she saw his name on her phone. And through it all, their professional relationship remained strong. Meridian's work with Hanseong was going exceptionally well, opening doors to new clients and new markets. Sarah's team was thriving, and she found herself grateful for the distraction of work during the long months of Minjun's absence. Finally, in May, Minjun returned to Seattle. Sarah picked him up at the airport, and when she saw him walking through the arrivals gate, she felt tears spring to her eyes. He looked tired, thinner than she remembered, but his smile when he saw her was brilliant. He dropped his bags and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I missed you so much, he murmured against her hair. I missed you too, Sarah said, her voice muffled against his chest. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, oblivious to the crowds flowing around them. Come on, Sarah said finally, pulling back to look at him. Let's get you home. They spent the weekend at Sarah's apartment, barely leaving except to order food. They talked for hours, catching up on everything they couldn't say over video chat, relearning each other's rhythms and patterns. And they made love, slow and tender, reconnecting in the most fundamental way. On Sunday evening, as they lay tangled together in Sarah's bed, Minjun said, I have something to tell you. Sarah propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. Should I be worried? No, Minjun said, smiling. At least, I hope not. The board offered me the CEO position. My father is retiring, and they want me to take over. Sarah's eyes widened. Minjun, that's incredible. Congratulations. Thank you. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. But there's a catch. The position is based in Seoul. If I accept, I'll need to move back to Korea permanently. Sarah felt her stomach drop. I see. I haven't given them an answer yet, Minjun continued, because I needed to talk to you first. Sarah, I love you. I want a future with you. But I also have responsibilities to my family, to the company my father built. I need to know, is this something you could see yourself doing? Moving to Seoul, building a life there with me. Sarah sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, her mind racing. Move to Seoul? Leave Meridian, leave Seattle, leave everything she'd built? It seemed impossible. But then she thought about the past 6 months, about how much she'd missed Minjun, about how empty her life had felt without him. She thought about the way he made her laugh, the way he challenged her, the way he loved her with his whole heart. I need time to think about it, she said finally. This is a huge decision, Minjun. It's not just about us. It's about my career, my company, my life. I know, Minjun said, sitting up beside her. And I'm not asking you to decide right now. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, I want you to know, whatever you decide, I'll support you. If you can't move to Seoul, we'll figure something else out. Maybe I turn down the CEO position. Maybe we do long distance permanently. Maybe. Don't, Sarah interrupted. Don't turn down the CEO position for me. That's your legacy, your family's company. You'd resent me eventually if you gave that up. I wouldn't, Minjun said firmly. You're more important to me than any job. You say that now, Sarah said softly. But in 5 years? 10 years? When you're watching someone else run the company your father built, when you're wondering what might have been. She shook her head. I won't be the reason you give up your dreams, Minjun. Then come with me, Minjun said, taking her hands. Build something new in Seoul. Expand Meridian internationally. You've always talked about wanting to break into Asian markets. This could be your opportunity. Sarah wanted to say yes. She wanted to be brave, to take the leap, to choose love over fear. But she also needed to be smart, to think this through carefully. Give me 2 weeks, she said. Let me talk to my team, look at the logistics, figure out if this is even possible. And then I'll give you an answer. 2 weeks, Minjun agreed. I can wait 2 weeks. Whoa, this is major. Do you think this would help or hinder Sarah's career? Do you think Sarah should take the risk? Let me know your thoughts. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah met with her senior partners, laying out the situation and asking for their honest opinions. Randall was supportive but cautious, pointing out the challenges of running a consultancy from overseas. Jennifer Kim, who'd become a friend and occasional collaborator, was enthusiastic, offering to help Sarah navigate Korean business culture. Sarah spent hours researching, making spreadsheets, running scenarios. She talked to other consultants who'd expanded internationally, to expats living in Seoul, to anyone who could give her insight into what this move would mean. And through it all, she kept coming back to one question. What did she want? Not what was smart, not what was safe, but what did she actually want? The answer, when she finally let herself acknowledge it, was simple. She wanted Minjun. She wanted a life with him, a future with him. And if that meant taking a risk, meant stepping outside her comfort zone, meant building something new in a foreign country, well, she'd done harder things. On the 14th day, Sarah called Minjun and asked him to meet her at the coffee shop where they'd had their first real conversation after the gala. He arrived looking nervous, his hands shoved in his pockets, his expression guarded. Hi, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Hi, Sarah replied. She took a deep breath. I have an answer for you. Minjun went very still. Okay. I've been thinking about what you said, about building something new in Seoul. And I realized I've spent 12 years building Meridian in Seattle. I've proven I can do it once. Maybe it's time to prove I can do it again, somewhere new, somewhere challenging. Hope flickered in Minjun's eyes. Sarah, I'm not giving up Meridian, she continued. I'm expanding it. I'll keep the Seattle office, with Randall running day-to-day operations. But I'll open a Seoul office, focusing on helping Western companies navigate Asian markets and vice versa. It'll be hard, and it'll take time, but I think it could work. You're saying yes? Minjun asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying yes, Sarah confirmed. I'm saying I love you, and I want to build a life with you, and I'm willing to take this risk, because I believe we're worth it. Minjun was around the table in an instant, pulling Sarah to her feet and into his arms. I love you, he said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I love you so much. Sarah laughed, tears streaming down her face. I love you too, even though you're making me move halfway around the world. I'll make it worth it, Minjun promised. I swear, Sarah, I'll spend the rest of my life making it worth it. You'd better, Sarah said, but she was smiling. They stood there in the coffee shop, holding each other, oblivious to the curious stares of other customers. And Sarah felt, for the first time in weeks, a sense of peace. This was right. This was where she was supposed to be. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the lobby of a sleek office building in Seoul's Gangnam district, looking up at the sign that read Meridian Investment Consultancy, Seoul office, in both English and Korean. Minjun stood beside her, his hand warm in hers. Ready? He asked. Sarah squeezed his hand. Ready. They walked in together, toward whatever came next, toward the future they were building together. It wouldn't be easy, nothing worth having ever was. But Sarah had learned, over the past year, that sometimes the biggest risks led to the greatest rewards. And as she looked at Minjun, saw the love and pride in his eyes, she knew she'd made the right choice. Sometimes, the person you least expect turns out to be exactly who you need. Sometimes, a mistake becomes an opportunity. And sometimes, love is worth taking a leap of faith. Sarah Chen had built her career on being smart, being careful, being prepared. But she'd built her future on being brave. And she wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you so much for staying until the end. I really enjoy bringing you stories every week. Please like, comment, and share for more. Until the next diary is uncovered, you can check out more at the channel Flaming Hearts Diaries. Take care.